President-elect Trump's allies in Congress proposed a new bill dubbed Make Greenland Great Again. It's meant to expedite a negotiation process with Denmark, which protects Greenland's autonomy.
Over to Europe now, where Denmark's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has been racing across the continent, trying to shore up support from allies. That following Donald Trump's repeated threats over Greenland.
President Trump says the United States needs Greenland for international security. The president insisting that the U.S. must control the semi-autonomous Danish territory.
The Arctic is a place where the world rarely looks until something goes wrong. Long stretches of quiet, long winters of stillness, long distances where news feels slow. But this morning, something broke the silence. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just enough for the people who pay attention to feel the shift. It began with a short statement from Copenhagen, a few carefully chosen lines from Denmark's Prime Minister, commending the people of Greenland for staying composed under extraordinary external pressure. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Everyone knew where that pressure came from. For weeks, the United States had been circling Greenland again, a familiar interest returning with sharper edges. President Trump had made no secret of his renewed ambition, securing Greenland in some form for the United States. The tone had changed since the first time he floated the idea. What began as an awkward joke 4 years ago had become policy discussion, then open rhetoric, then something closer to a claim. While Washington's attention locked onto that objective, something far quieter unfolded behind the scenes. Something few expected, and even fewer understood in the moment. Canada made its move. A $3 billion mining agreement, negotiated without spectacle, quietly tied Canada, Greenland, and the European Union into a shared economic corridor. No flags, no speeches, just signatures, and a shift that recalibrated the balance of power in the Arctic more effectively than any military deployment could have. By the time the papers were signed, Washington was still preparing its arguments. The Arctic, once a stage dominated by a single actor, had begun to feel crowded. Trump's return to the presidency in November 2024 set the tone for what followed. Old ambitions resurfaced, the border wall, a new vision for NATO, a harder line on trade, and nestled among them was the goal that seemed to interest him most, bringing Greenland under American influence. By early 2025, the language in Washington had changed. Discussion shifted from access to ownership, from cooperation to control. In a high-stakes address to Congress, Trump spoke of Greenland not as a partner, but as a necessity. A piece of the map the United States had a right to, because geography demanded it. Inside the West Wing, the National Security Council revived old documents, relics from the Cold War. One detailed how the U.S. once planned to seal the Arctic gap from Soviet submarines. Another traced the evolution of the Thule radar belt, suggesting updated protocols for missile detection. These weren't symbolic papers, they were operational, and they pointed to one conclusion. Controlling the Arctic meant controlling Greenland. But military maps were only part of the story. Beneath the island's ice lies one of the world's largest reserves of untapped critical minerals, the kind that power electric vehicles, aerospace systems, advanced weaponry, and renewable technologies. Rare earths, niobium, graphite, zirconium, resources measured not in tons, but in decades of global demand. Alongside them, vast stores of oil and natural gas still locked underground. In Washington, these were described as strategic imperatives. In Nuuk, they were described with another word, ours. Greenlandic leaders responded quickly and without hesitation. One called Trump's language surreal. Another described it as disrespectful. A senior official addressed the issue directly. Greenland is not for sale. Denmark backed that position in full. A joint statement from Copenhagen and Greenland's coalition government clarified the matter with no diplomatic cushioning. Sovereignty would not be negotiated, traded, or pressured. But while Washington and Copenhagen exchanged statements, something else was happening at a much quieter pace: the reshaping of Greenland's economic future. Europe's Critical Raw Materials Act of 2023 changed everything. Suddenly, Greenland wasn't just a frozen outpost. It was a key player in Europe's clean energy transition. And as demand grew, companies capable of executing Arctic projects were positioned to lead. Two of them were Canadian. Greenland Resources Inc., once focused on molybdenum in northern Ontario, saw an opening. Europe needed high-strength steel for EVS, infrastructure, and defense. Greenland had the ore, Canada had the expertise, and by late 2024, the pieces aligned. The European Investment Bank's Green Fund expressed support. Denmark's Export Credit Agency stepped in. And by March 2025, Greenland issued a 30-year mining license. Array from that project would travel to Europe, bypassing the United States entirely. The second move came from Amarok Minerals, a Canadian-listed firm operating across multiple capitals. It revived a dormant gold project at Nalunak, long considered too costly to restart. Fresh financing changed the equation. Danish, Norwegian, British, and even American investors contributed. The irony wasn't lost on analysts. Money that originated in U.S. funds was now helping Canadian companies build the very Arctic infrastructure the U.S. wanted to control. As these agreements took shape, Europe responded with strategic clarity. France deployed a nuclear-powered submarine to patrol northern waters. The EU committed funds to support capacity building in Greenland, including an airport expansion. Norway reinforced Denmark's position publicly. Poland stayed cautious, balancing its reliance on U.S. defense support. Canada, meanwhile, issued warnings about forced resource politics. But behind those words was a different kind of planning. The emergence of an Arctic blueprint described by analysts as the hexagon. This strategy wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was thorough. Mining hubs across Baffin Island, new shipping routes tied to the Northwest Passage, infrastructure that connected Greenlandic operations to Canadian ports, cooperative space surveillance layers with the U.S., cautiously maintained but carefully bounded. It was a design for long-term stability, one that reduced dependence on any single superpower. As this architecture took shape, the consequences became visible in places far from the Arctic. American supply chains strained, molybdenum shipments became uncertain, defense contractors began scrambling for alternative sources, Lockheed Martin delayed tests, Raytheon sought new suppliers in Australia and South America. Even U.S. battery manufacturers saw projections shift downward, missing key inputs originally expected through Greenland. In Washington, frustration deepened. Alaska's Senator Lisa Murkowski warned that escalating tensions risked undermining Arctic cooperation. Several Northeastern senators proposed joint mining initiatives, but attempts by the State Department to secure trilateral resource agreements with Denmark and Greenland failed. Politely at first, firmly later. Canada moved ahead regardless. Ontario revised its battery export rules, strengthening its foothold in the EV economy. Engineers and energy executives began discussing floating LNG platforms in northern bays, projects aimed squarely at European markets. Germany, still searching for stable, non-Russian energy sources, expressed early interest. As the region shifted, Greenland's own financial outlook changed too. Revenue flowed not just from molybdenum and gold, but from copper and silver, byproducts feeding into Europe's hydrogen and renewable technologies. That money funneled into Greenland's national fund, strengthening its path toward greater autonomy. By spring, the geopolitical map looked different enough that analysts started using new language: Arctic realignment, post-American arc, and the Northern Coalition. None were official terms. All reflected a shared understanding. The Arctic was no longer a quiet frontier shaped by a single power. In this reshaped landscape, the United States was still influential, but no longer central. Canada and Greenland had built something steadier. Europe had anchored itself. Denmark had strengthened its ties. And the Arctic, long overlooked, had become a theater where strategy replaced spectacle. Tonight, Greenland is quiet again. Snow drifts across frozen ground. Ships rest in icy harbors. Radar stations blink against the horizon. But behind that calm lies a new balance, one built not on claims or threats, but on agreements, partnerships, and a shared recognition that the North will define decades to come. So now the real question is this: what does this new shift mean for the Arctic and for the alliances that once controlled it? If you're following along, stay with us. Much more is on the way.